Right, I guess we can begin. Hi everyone, I'm happy to see you here. My name is Paweł. I'm software development manager in a company called Xibia, that the Polish part used to be known as PGS Software in Poland. Maybe some of you have heard. And today I will tell you a somehow nostalgic story about generation with an IT flavor, let's say. Right, so here's our plan. We will start with some introduction. So what is this generation all about? What is about this conflict? Is it a myth or reality? We'll then move to all those different letters, weird letters that represent those generations. So a little bit particular info about them. And then some summary, some additional, let's say, miscellaneous information. If you don't know how to call something on the presentation, you just call it miscellaneous. That somehow works. And disclaimer, there will be a lot of memes, and as you may know, memes about generations, so boomer and millennials are usually somehow offensive. I was trying to bash everyone the same way, but please don't get offended too much, so keep your distance. All right, so speaking of offensive stuff, let's start with a short movie that kind of shows how people born in different decades would react to hitting the wall. There is some sound in that, but it's not really relevant. So. Okay. So stay with me, don't get offended. Right, so act first. Let's start with some basics. So this idea of generation or demographic cohorts, what does it really mean? So it's concept specific to kind of like a Western culture. When you Google this stuff, it's mostly about those generation in the Western world. And the Western world is kind of fluid concept because, for instance, Poland 50 years ago was considered like the Eastern Bloc, so kind of Soviet occupation, but now we are a part of the Western world, basically. So it kind of worries, so maybe it's more connected to this old Western world. And the idea is that basically when you are young, up to more or less 20 years old, the important event in the world and also the, say, important technology breakdowns kind of shape you. Of course, you can adapt later after you're 20 or something, but there is this like a core values or core understanding of the world. So we have some various types of technologies here. There's TV, there is smartphones, dumb phones, computers. There are some events like Cold War, the end of Cold War, 9/11, more for maybe Americans. There's also a boat. You might be wondering what's with that boat there. The boat is kind of like, it's a first act. So it's kind of like if you have shotgun in the first act, hang over on the wall over the fireplace. It's usually the case that the shotgun will be fired from in the act 3. So we have a boat and we'll be rowing this boat in act 3. So bear with me. So this original, let's say, theory kind of was created around 100 years ago by Karl Mannheim in Germany. You might find some citation of his work dated 1952. This is actually an English translation of the original work. And that he come up with this idea that we can segment population into this periods of roughly almost 20 years, 13 to 25 more or less, and we can somehow tell a little bit about people based on when they were born. So that's the general idea. This is the image from Wikipedia, by the way, to get you on the same page what those particular generation means. So basically we have these trapezoids, two trapezoids. The left one is the oldest people in given generation. The right one are the youngest people in given generation. So they are spaced like 15 to 20 years more or less. On the left we start with date of birth, then we go to around 18, 20 years old, then to around 60, and then to 70. So like start and end of like ending the productivity period, let's say, at work maybe. And of course, people live longer than work, hopefully. So there should be this kind of trail at the end. So we start with generation alpha, which is basically kids up to 10 years old. Then we have Gen Z, 10 to 26 years old, more or less. By the way, those numbers are not always the same. Let's say theoretical work, you can spot numbers that differ by 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I found one that was 7 years different than those particular ones. But those are, let's say, the most common that you can find, and they are also on Wikipedia, so matches the picture. So we have Gen Z, 10 to 26 years old. We have millennials, roughly 26 to 42. We have Generation X, 42 to 58, more or less. Then baby boomers, 58 to 77. Silent generation, and then some more, over 95 years old currently. How does it look in real society? So this is data from Poland from around 4 years ago, more or less. You can notice that there is this peak, the red peak of baby boomers, so people that were born after the Second World War, around 60, 70, late 50s currently. And there is the second peak of millennials and maybe younger Gen X, and in between mostly you have this Generation X. And then we have Generation Z, and we would expect another peak there, but stuff kind of changed, and people don't have that many kids currently, so it kind of flattens out. And how does it look in our industry? So those are two examples I was able to gather. First is the population of a Polish software house, actually 1/3 of the population, but more or less representative. What's characteristic here is that 80% millennials, right? 80%. There is 10% of Gen Z at the beginning who just start their career, and there is roughly 10% of Gen X who is more experienced. And on the bottom we have another example. That's a software house in Netherlands. We can see it's a bit different. So we have more people in the X generation. We have some small amount of baby boomers also, and a little bit less Gen Z. There are two reasons for that, actually, because this actual company has more of a consulting profile. They usually hire a little bit more experienced people, like at least 5, something like that. But also, of course, in Western world, IT started a little bit earlier and was much more popular than in Poland, right, after the transformation. So that's the reason why they have more people in 40s, 50s, and 60s who do that stuff. And since we are here, maybe we can do a little bit of research. What do you think? Okay, so let's check the distribution, generational distribution of a Polish IT conference. So whoever is 26 or younger, please raise your hand. Don't be shy. You can cheat, that's okay. Don't be shy, you are supposed to be the most extrovert by statistics. All right, who is between 27 and 42? Okay, you see, this kind of similar to this chart. Okay, who is 43 to 58 levels? Who leveled that far? High level players, nice. All right, anyone 59 to 77? No. Sometimes, yeah. I know this feeling. All right, anyone didn't raise a hand? Nobody would admit that. All right, so kind of matches, right? We are mostly millennials here. Okay, so what about this myth and reality? Are those generation differences true or not? The easy answer is yes and no. So you can, if you Google generation differences, you will find a lot of presentation that will get straight into the particular generation, saying that boomers are this way, you should do that, millennials are this way, you should look at that, etc. If you add a myth to this search, then you will find a lot of articles that say that all of that is actually bullshit, everyone is the same, etc., etc. So what is the truth in that? It's kind of in the middle, I would say. There are several factors to that, and several, let's say, there's a lot of context. So basically you can, since a lot of decades, a lot of time, you can find this notion that there is those young people and those old people. Those young people who are irresponsible, they want to do weird stuff, etc. Those old people who are experienced, have authority, etc., and keep the order. And as you can see, it's kind of similar. there is this new me generation or 20-something or something, and they are focused on themselves, etc. It was the same with baby boomers 50 years ago. It was the same kind of 20 years ago with millennials, and it's similar with Gen Z currently. If you Google for some research, you will find a lot of papers that deal with generational conflicts over basically 3,000 years. You can find some papers in ancient Athens, like 2,500 years ago. You can find something in Spain 300 years ago, etc., etc. And of course, a lot of memes, mostly with boomers and millennials, because I don't know, kind of flies quite well. And even 3,000 years ago, there was this writing on the clay tablet that those young people are not really up to the task. And there's this idea kind of generational narcissism. So we might think that our generation is the best, and those who are younger are, irresponsible, they don't know life, etc. Those who are older are just stopping progress and annoying, and we are the best, right? Also, yeah? A little bit. That's probable, right? Okay, also, there's this sliding window. If you look at research now and 20 years ago or more, usually there's like 4 generations covered, and usually they are divided into 2. So there are those 2 younger ones and 2 older ones. So if you look currently, millennials are still those who are, irresponsible, etc., and Xers are the last adult generation. But if you look at the research from 20 years ago, they would say that Xers are responsible and boomers are the last adult generation, right? So the perspective shifts, kind of. And also, when we are born is one thing, and how old are you is a different thing. So we kind of change as we age. Our personality stabilizes around 20 years old. So these are the big 5 traits of personality, but they are still a little bit adjusting after next 30 or something, right? People usually get a little bit conservative with age. Our conscientiousness goes up, so we are like more orderly, I would say. Our agreeableness usually goes up, so we are more diplomatic, maybe it's easier to talk to us. Openness goes lower, so we are not that open to new experience. We are not that extrovert, like if you're 20 years old, going for a pub crawl is a nice idea. If you are 40, maybe sometimes a little bit more sleep is better. So that changes. And neuroticism, so basically how stable you are. With age it goes down, so you're actually more stable, right, emotionally. So this is something that adds up a layer of, let's say, complexity to all these generational issues. Right. Aside from that, the most important thing is individual differences, right? So what genes you have, what was your upbringing, also what culture you come from, right? If you were born in Germany, in Japan, in the United States, it kind of sets this baseline on your behavior. And your personality also is, let's say, your preference. It doesn't mean that you always act according to your personality. You can act a bit differently. It's just like your default behavior. And only on top of that, we have those generation differences, right? So a lot of stuff happening at the same time. All right, there's kind of funny theory that I decided that I will include that. It's actually in the category of pseudoscience on Wikipedia. Strauss-Howe generation theory. It states that every 80 or so years, the history repeats. So we have this cycle of around 4 generations. It's actually specific mostly to the United States. Later it was extended to the whole Anglo-Saxon world. But they had this idea that every 80 years there is some major conflict. So there was Second World War, there was a civil war in the United States, there was an independence war, and kind of now we have another 80 years or so, and we have a little bit of problems in the world. And depending when you were born on the cycle, it kind of influences your personality. So if you were born just 20 years before the war, you are the young soldier who has to be, grow up quickly and go to war. Then if you are born later, the world is rebuilding from the chaos. Then there is a period of wealth. Then it stabilizes. People started to get bored, right? They do some revolutions, etc., and the cycle repeats. So that's just a curiosity, basically. I wouldn't treat it very seriously. It actually, in their second book, it goes up to around 500 years. So they had like 25 generations in this running in the cycles of periods. All right, what's important here, right? There are some statistical differences, but there are many reasons for that, and also you should be careful with using that. So basically, you should treat this knowledge as, a delicate tool in your arsenal of dealing with people, not as a hammer, to hammer everyone because somebody is a boomer or somebody is a millennial. So please be careful. All right, so let's move to actual generations then. As a, let's say, opening bracket, we'll start with the silent generation. So 77 to 95 years old. They have a superpower. You cannot call them boomers, right? And it's not very likely that you will encounter them probably in work. Maybe some like CEOs or something like this. So I will try not to spend too much time here. But there's a game for you. There's 8 people from IT, from this generation. All of them except one is alive. Actually, unfortunately, Mr. Gordon Moore passed away in March this year. When I was creating these slides, he was still there. But maybe let's try to see how many of those 8 people do you recognize? Do you know what they did? Maybe let's use fingers. You can say 0, up to 5, up to 8. Try to raise some fingers and let's see how many do you know. I'm cheating because I Googled it before. Okay, but we have something. So Gordon Moore, the author of Moore's Law and one of the co-founders of Intel. Margaret Hamilton coined the term of software engineering, and she was writing the software for the Apollo spacecraft mission in the 60s. Donald Knuth, the author of Art of Computer Programming and the father of analysis of algorithms, we can say. Barbara Liskov is from the Liskov substitution principle, so that's the L in solid, and also author of many papers, scientific papers. Alan Kay was working on graphical user interfaces at Xerox before Apple and Amazon Microsoft decided to kind of borrow them, but also did a lot of other research. We have Brian Kerrigan and Ken Thompson connected with Unix and the first book about C. Also, Mr. Ken Thompson is the author of Go language, and Larry Ellison from Oracle, one of the co-founders. Right, so let's move to baby boomers. 58 to 77 years old, people born just before the Second World War. You can kind of define them as analog generation, right? So when they were young, up to 20 years old, the world was basically analog. You were using pen and paper. There was no digital technology, and they had to move on later. Some influencing events. There was a Cold War, so the danger of being annihilated by the nuclear explosion, right? There was a landing on the moon. We have television. There is the Palace of Culture and Science in Poland, built in the 50s. Assassination of JFK. We have the early logo of Polish television, actually from the 70s, I believe, and some first mainframe computers, right? Not really much popular yet. And what to do with baby boomers, right? So they like face-to-face communication. They have high power distance, right? So if somebody is a boss or a doctor or has some formal title, he has an authority, like undisputable authority, kind of. So they look at this structure, hierarchy, stability, loyalty is important for them. In Poland, many people from this generation were working for their entire life in one company, for instance, right? They are used to staying in one place for longer. They value hard skills, so it's important what you can do with hard skills, not that important how smoothly you talk, let's say. And if you want to make them happy, maybe you can think about putting them in some mentoring position, stuff like this, where they can share their knowledge. Right, so the second part of the game. Fingers up to 8. How many do you recognize? We have 6, 5, 6, 6. Nice. We have 7. Okay. So Bjorn Strostrup, what did he do? Anyone knows? C++. Steve Wozniak from Apple, right? James Gosling, Java. Bill Gates, I guess anyone knows Bill Gates. Guido von Rossum. Anyone? Python, good. Tim Cook from Apple. Anders Heisberg. Anyone knows? Author of C#. The opposition. In a Java conference. All right, and Jeff Bezos of Amazon. On to the Generation X. So Generation X, 42 to 58 years old. The name comes from, times were changing. There was a lot of new technology, some social unrest. So we didn't really know. They didn't really know what the generation will look like. So it was kind of unknown. There was a book, Generation X, and there was also a song called Generation X, somewhere in the 70s or something, or 80s. So that kind of came from that. We can call them digital immigrants. So their childhood was more like analog ones, but they transformed to follow this digital revolution on all the computers. They are sometimes called latchkey kids. That goes from the fact that the divorce rate was increased. There was a lot of parents who were both working, and a lot of children had to come back to an empty home, and they had this key on their neck. So latchkey kids, MTV generation is more like American thing. And in current research, they get called the last adult generation. All right, some influences, for instance, in Poland, the martial law introduction in 1981, in general, the fortunate dissolution of Soviet Union, the disaster in Chernobyl, 86, first computers. I guess my first computer was also Commodore, but it was already 10 years old or something. I got it in 92 or 93. The rise of pop culture, first cell phones, but like rather more business thing yet. Not that popular, and we have Sony Walkman as well here. Right, so you can see that the year differs by one here. It's like 79, sometimes it's 80. So it's different, but what's important with X's? So they focus on autonomy, because it's kind of connected to this, statistically that they were alone a lot, so hence autonomy, but it's again just statistics. They focus on result, right? So they want to know when they are going, how fast, how much should be done, if they are on time or not. There is still kind of respect the authority, like the rules and procedures, a little bit at least. And career is very important for them. So they often think of themselves as, I'm a programmer, I'm a manager, I'm someone else, not that I have a life, right, outside of work. So if you're a team leader or just, looking at your teammates, be careful about burnout, right? They are kind of prone to working long hours because work is very important for them, and it might lead some dark places sometimes. Okay, the next game. We have 4, we have 7, nice. We have 8. Okay. Good. So we have Michael Dell from Dell Computers, Satya Nadella from Microsoft currently, I believe. Rasmus Lerdorf, anyone knows? PHP, good. Linus Torvalds, I guess, Linux, Git, quite common. John Carmack, the ID software and computer games. Elon Musk, breaking Twitter and shooting spacecraft. All right. Larry Page, Google, good. And Jack Dorsey? Twitter, the founder of Twitter, good. No, he just bought it. All right, and on to millennials. So age 27 to 42, the name comes, Y is after X, so it's like natural progression, but also Y is like why, so they're asking a lot of questions why something is like this. They need to know. They sometimes are called 90s kids, and by the way, if you were 90s kids means that you were a kid in 90s, not that you were born in 90s. So if you're born 98 or 99, then sorry, you are on this council, but we don't grant you the rank of master. We can call them digital natives because the computers were widespread already since usually young age, not necessarily internet often, but not for all of them, not that popular at least, I would say. Also, there are some names of generations that are kind of between X's and millennials. There's like Xennials. I found the name Elder Millennial. I like it especially because I'm like Elder Millennial. It's like I'm 83, I will be actually 40 in 2 weeks. There is a sketch on Netflix called Elder Millennial. It's like stand-up comedy. It's quite nice. All right, some influences. So we have the first internet, old modems. There's a globalization, so basically expansion of European Union, the NATO, first social networks like Gadu-Gadu in Poland, for instance, first cell phones. There's 9/11, if you ask Americans, probably most important thing. It's kind of on a border between actually millennials and Generation Z. If you ask somebody if he remembers or she 9/11, you have to be at least 4 years old then when it happened. So it's like a border between Gen Z and millennial. And what else? There was a crisis in 2008 and 2009. It was not that heartfelt in Poland actually, because we were, I think, one of the few countries that went with positive GDP growth. But actually I was looking for a job in 2008 and it was not that easy. And later then it was kind of difficult to get a raise in international company. Right, what to do with millennials? Millennials are the most educated generation so far. For instance, in Poland in 1990, there was 300,000 students, but only 15 years later, there was 2 million, right, without like an increasing population. Really. Millennials like technology. There's this term helicopter parents, because if the millennial children had a problem, there was also always this parent who can land nearby and help. So we are kind of, let's say, used to working in teams. We are said to be the first generation that really looked into this life-work balance, right? So work is not the whole life, and we need to just work to get money and live and do nice things and interesting stuff. So over time, it's maybe not that great idea. We have lower power distance, so our boss is still a boss, but not that high, I would say. Closer to being a buddy. What else? More flexibility than elder generations. The teamwork, we kind of like to have a personal brand. We are more often freelancers because we have more flexibility than we like changes, more direct, more open than Xers on average again. All right, next game. That might be difficult, I guess. Give me fingers. 1, 2. Do we have 3? Oh, there's 3 there. We have 4. All right, so Ryan Dahl, anyone? Author of Node.js. Zhang Yiming, the founder of TikTok. Then Daniel Ek, anyone? Spotify, good. Mark Zuckerberg, I guess most of us knows. Melanie Perkins, anyone knows? Founder of Canava. You don't know. Canava is like a designer software, I believe. I haven't used that, but I was... Canva. My bad. Canva. All right, so when I was looking for most famous tech millennials, baby boomers, etc., that was the name that come up a lot. Patrick Collison, anyone knows? One of the founders of Stripe. Whitney Hurt. Tinder, rings a bell. Tinder and Bumble, dating apps. And Evan Spiegel, I'm not sure. Sorry? Good, Snapchat. All right. On to the Generation Z. All right, so 10 to 26 years old, sometimes called post-millennials, not very original. Sometimes called snowflakes, like everyone is different, like, the snowflake server with each has different configuration a little bit. Zoomers, so play on basically boomers, see, connect, communicate, change, and you can say online natives because internet was already widespread and normal when they were born, so it's normal for everything to be online for Gen Z. All right, so influences. By the way, those influences, that's let's say I did a little bit of research in the internet, but I also talk with quite a lot of people of different age and ask them what they thought was most influential event in their life. So Gen Z mostly say about the pandemic of COVID, right? So they were basically at school, so remote schooling, or maybe they were just starting first work, so They were hired remotely. The widespread of technology, smartphones, there is current, let's say, unrest in the world. We are kind of witnessing like unwinding of globalization, basically, with this war. Not sure what happened next. The popularity of social media. By the way, I learned that Snapchat is not that popular anymore. I was doing this presentation, so maybe TikTok is more popular. Let's say more awareness of climate change and all the things that we do to Earth, basically. There's a lot of polarization in the society. So we have these two separate bubbles that don't really talk to each other anymore, right? And they are growing far apart. And social media is kind of connected with that because topics that are controversial are better clickable. So it kind of connects. And we have basically technology that's starting to resemble magic. So drone spaceship that's landing on drone ship and stuff like this. Right, what to do with Gen Z? So Gen Z is even more educated than millennials on average. And there is a lot of sources of knowledge nowadays because basically every topic that you can imagine you can find on YouTube currently if you want to learn anything. The diversity is normal for Gen Z. Like they have friends all over the world. They are very individualistic. So for instance, if you run a bank and you set the same wallpaper for everyone, the same login screen at the software development department, it's not the best idea, right? If it's for clerks in the front end, in the store, in the bank buildings, it's okay. Maybe if they talk to some clients, actual clients, but in general, Gen Z prefer to have a lot of individuality and options at work, and they kind of treat work as more as fun, right? So it's not the sad place that you have to go anymore, but something where it can be cool and fun and chill. All right, so they kind of look at this just cause. So companies should no longer be about making money. Maybe there are some other important things like ecology, maybe some local communities, maybe doing something for greater good, right? That's something that can gather Gen Z for your company. There's the idea of gamification, so that can be used in recruitment. Gen Z is probably one of the most entrepreneurial generations of them all, so they have a lot of options for monetizing their stuff. So if you do music or some other stuff, you can put it on Spotify or YouTube. If you have some hobby, you are buying, for instance, some specific parts, maybe paints or something, you can set up an online shop easily to do something with that. And they value a quick feedback, right? It may be connected with the social media, a lot of likes, comments, immediate feedback. So it's nice to give feedback quite often, and even flatter hierarchy. So my boss is basically my buddy, not somebody who is high up there. So that's a typical approach. Okay, I have no game for you this time because I was really trying hard to find someone, and there are a lot of people who are influential and are starting nice stuff, but it's actually too early to tell, right? We are not sure which of those startups that are led by Gen Z will be really influential, like the scale of Facebook or some others. So if I do this presentation 5 years or something, I will probably try better and add something to this slide. Okay, and as a closing bracket, we have Generation Alpha, so 10 years old and younger. We don't yet know a lot about them. We have some time before they hit the work, right? But they are really immersed in this digital mobile AI world, right? Maybe it's possible that a kid can install a new application on the smartphone before they can even walk. So that's those ideas. We'll see. All right, so let's move on to Act 3 of our journey. So I promised you a boat. So here is a boat. And let's try to imagine that we have different generations that will be rowing this boat. Let's have a boomer captain and boomer crew. The captain is saying we are rowing this direction, and it's usually good enough for the crew to do the work, right? If we have Xers on the boat, Xer would ask, okay, what's our target? What island we are heading to? How fast should we go? Are we on the course? Should we go faster, slower? This kind of stuff. When you ask millennials, they would say, okay, boss, but there's an engine on that boat, right? So why don't we just turn on the engine and use that instead of rowing? And you can say that, okay, maybe we are in some, nature protected area like Mazurian lakes, for instance, and you don't want to disturb wild animals actually because you can do that. And that's good enough, right? Okay, we row now. We know the reason for that. And Gen Z might ask, okay, but are we going to the right island, right? Is it island of profit or ecology or maybe doing something that actually matters, right? So that's kind of still like a model, right? Not everyone is like this, but might serve you as a little bit of summary of all those 4 main generations that I mentioned today. Okay, so who is familiar with Clifton strength analysis, the Gallup test? There are some people. There's this test that there is like 34, I think, strengths. You can do the test and like prioritize which of those are more, let's say, stronger in you. All of them have some strengths and weaknesses as well. But in general, Clifton did this research how those strengths on average changes over the years. It's kind of shifted because we don't have Gen Z here, but we have the silent generation. But what we can gather from that is that responsibility kind of goes down a little bit. So we are not that maybe orderly, but on the other hand, the empathy goes up. So kind of trade this order for, understanding feelings of other people, which is maybe not as bad trait, I would say. But a little bit about cultures. Margaret Mead did a research in the 70s, and the idea was that for all the time in the history, basically up to roughly 70s or 50s, you had this type of a culture that, older people were teaching young people the ways of life, right? So if I was a medieval blacksmith, I would teach my son to be a blacksmith, my father teach me to be a blacksmith, and it kind of goes on and goes on. But something started to change because technology was gaining very quickly, the world was changing very fast, and currently it's actually a little bit the other way around, right? So for instance, you are teaching your parents or grandparents how to use smartphone, right? Because you know better. So we are kind of moving to this post-figurative culture of mysterious children, and it kind of creates a lot of chaos in the world in the process. Kind of connected topic is the mentoring. So there was this idea of reverse mentoring introduced in General Electric in the 90s, formally at least. There was the idea that new people who were coming to the company were officially paired with some older executives, managers, and they were mentoring themselves both ways. So managers were teaching about the company and stuff like this, what was done in the past, and young people mostly about technology and stuff like this. So if you're running some mentoring programs, maybe in your company, something like that, you can, usually people do this like out of the box, but you can maybe add something about this as well. Okay, but about teams. When we are around knowledge work, engineering, IT, etc., it's good to have different perspective, like different personalities, different point of views. So if you have people with a lot of experience on the team, they will tell you what can go wrong. If you have new people with not a lot of experience, they have a lot of this, free spirit and creativity and come up with unexpected ideas, right? Like in the story, there's a guy who didn't know that something cannot be done, so he just came and did it, right? So basically, it's good to focus on things that connect us, not that divide us in the teams. Right, and in the end, we can look at all those generations in a way that they prefer some stuff in the work or something is important, but in the end, we can say that basically all of that is important to most of us, right? We can look at this, that certain generation kind of brought something to a workplace at some time, and now we have all of that. There is it's blurred on purpose, so don't worry, it's nothing wrong with your right side. That's the picture from Reinventing Organization by Frederic Laloux. Anyone read that book, maybe? But it's a book about evolution of organizations from like 10,000 years ago and primitive organization based on one strong leader who ruled by force up to basically present days when several like levels of organization emerged. And the idea here is that, Xers maybe brought some transparent targets to our work, millennials brought some life-work balance, Gen Z added, more fun and chill at work, and in the end, we kind of all generations benefit from all those things that were added to our workplaces by particular generations. Right, that's it basically. If you prefer reading instead of hearing, I have a blog. It is called How to Train Your Java. It's not really a lot about Java anymore. It's more like general software and peopleware. And there's an article about basically loosely based on this presentation or the other way around, the generation of developers. So you can treat it as a notes or some additional information. If you want to ask me some questions, you can catch me on the conference. You can tweet me while it's still working at least. You can add me on LinkedIn, and basically that's it of the content. So take care of yourselves and others around you. Thank you very much.